Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Leah Litman back with us today. We'll chat with Leah in just a second, but first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So let's get into our big thing of the week. Epstein. Let's play this clip.
Thank you so much, President Trump. Two questions for you. One, were you aware of and did you personally approve the prison transfer for Ghislaine Maxwell that your Justice Department?
I didn't know about it at all. No, I read about it just like you did.
And do you believe that she is?
It's not a very uncommon thing.
Do you believe that she's credible to be listening to? Your Deputy Attorney General sat down with her recently.
Well, let me tell you, he's a very talented man. His name is Todd Blanche. He's a very legitimate person, very high. I just a very highly thought of person, respected by everybody. And I didn't talk to him about it, but I will tell you that whatever he asked would be totally appropriate, and it's not an uncommon thing to do that. And I think he probably wants to make sure that, people that should not be involved or aren't involved are not hurt by something that would be very, very unfortunate, very unfair to a lot of people. But I will say this, Todd Blanche is one of the most highly respected people you'll ever meet. So I know this. I didn't discuss it with him, but anything he talked about with her or the fact that he did that, not unusual, number one, and most importantly is something that would be totally above board.
There's so much to unpack in that clip. First of all, he didn't know. He didn't know that Maxwell was moved to a minimum security prison?
Why would he know? He has no idea.
He's very busy.
The United States president, on his watch, has a convicted sex trafficker. In fact, mind you, the only person sitting in a prison for these heinous crimes committed against teenage girls. She gets moved to what they call a camp, a minimum security camp, and he doesn't know?
Happens all the time, apparently, according to him. All the time.
Yeah, it's not uncommon. No, it actually is incredibly uncommon. There's never been a case, actually, where a sex trafficker has been upgraded to a cushy minimum security camp. And I love it. It's like, I read about it. You read about it? What were you, searching the net? And you, what do you mean you read? First of all, he doesn't read it.
I was about to say, that's a lie. He didn't read it.
And the last part of that clip is probably the most telling thing of all. It is the quiet part out loud. It's like Todd Blanche went down there and, his job is to make sure that a lot of people who are mentioning the phone who could get hurt, they don't get hurt. Who are you talking about? You definitely aren't talking about the victims.
Definitely not.
Who are you talking about? The rich, powerful Republican cronies of yours, or you, or whoever? Who are you talking about that he's protecting, who need to be protected from getting hurt? God, it is truly unbelievable, this whole thing. But it's not going away. It's been a month, and Trump is desperately trying to deflect and distract. I mean, we've had everything from Rosie O'Donnell and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton coming back into the conversation, to it's a Democrat hoax, to whatever.
The gift that keeps on giving.
It's hard to imagine how they're going to get out of this. I mean, they're now strategizing. They tried to have a meeting at the vice president's house, and it moved to the White House.
It was going to be with Attorney General Pam Bondi, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, FBI Director Kash Patel, J.D. Vance, he called it, Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, and others. So now you're saying it's
It was moved to the White House, apparently, because obviously it was
So it happened, or it's going to happen?
I didn't confirm whether it happened or not, but it was either going to or it happened. But also, you think Trump would want to have this meeting where he wasn't in it? The whole idea that they would have a meeting to discuss Epstein and Trump wouldn't be in the meeting or wouldn't insist on being in the meeting is crazy.
Plausible deniability or whatever.
They don't bother with that. They do not bother. Are you joking?
So it sounds like a good meeting, but I don't want to be a part of it.
Yeah, that would
got to keep my distance. All right, I'll be there.
Plausible deniability went out with democracy a while ago.
Yeah, but the funny thing to me, which I still chuckle at every time I think about it, is that this meeting was supposed to be about getting on the same page with the message.
Yeah.
How are we messaging this Epstein thing. And are they forgetting that their boss vomits out nonsensical, illogical, incriminating bullshit every time he opens his mouth?
I mean, you can see why Vance and anyone else would want to have this meeting without Trump present.
Sure.
So, the House Oversight Committee, which is chaired by the very neutral and unbiased James Comer, they've issued all these subpoenas. But like Alex Acosta, the one guy who should be subpoenaed, the guy who cut this sweetheart deal with Epstein, or James Comey's daughter, who prosecuted the case down in Florida, who knows probably more than anybody, who was just fired by Trump. What is Bill Clinton going to tell you? This is all just performative bullshit. This is not going to make MAGA go, okay, great, thanks, we got what we wanted.
No, but they probably enjoy the show of it, I'm sure.
If they can be distracted again. However, if you listen to Andrew Schultz, you listen to Joe, they're not accepting the bullshit this time.
No, but also I would say that all of these influencers in his MAGA realm are also just grifting off of this because they see they're probably going to make more money saying this.
I don't know. I would respectfully
I mean, it's not
disagree.
only that. I think
I've listened to them talk, and they are genuinely upset. They're genuinely disappointed. Andrew Schultz, he voted for him. He helped elect him, and he's like, "What the fuck? We're being gaslit. This is bullshit." Mm-hmm. And he's saying that to an audience who very well could say, "Fuck you, we love Trump." So I do think it is genuine, but I do think there's something different happening here with this conspiracy. It is breaking through in a way that nothing... I mean, look, these are all panic moves. It is not yet working. Will it eventually work? I don't know. I'd like to think it isn't, but this is now 4+ weeks, I think it's going on. And if anything, it's intensified.
Yeah, I don't think it's going away. I agree with you there. It's very hard for them to put this genie back in the bottle because the base has been fed this for so long. So a percentage of the base, I think, is going to be lost to him.
Yeah. When the elections that we've had are won and lost on the margins, 3%, 4%, 5%, if that peels away, it's a game changer.
You can't have the biggest cheerleader, Marjorie Taylor Greene, this riled up and not on the same page. It's not going to work for him.
No.
There's no way. It doesn't matter if they release everything because someone's going to say, well, you're not releasing everything because you promised us X and you're still hiding shit. Well, there is no way out.
They have to release at least what they promised. And you cannot say, yes, I control everything. There is no reason, politically, legally, whatever, that would stop me from releasing everything I promised you, especially if I'm innocent, but I just don't want to release it. I'll release Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
I'll release JFK. I'll release the Penske files from Seinfeld. But the one set of files I promised you that you are demanding and expect, I'm not going to do that. Even though I'm innocent, even though I could. How does he answer that? How does he address that? And they know it. That's why they're angry.
Yes.
And to tell them, oh, by the way, I've told you and my people have told you for years about this, but now I'm going to tell you it's just all a Democrat hoax. You think they're going to buy that? So he is spinning. All of them are the mouse on the wheel. But look, I always try to be objective. And Trump has literally escaped every crisis ever.
That is true.
Ever. Everything.
Yep.
He literally could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and no one would give a shit in his MAGA cult.
This is way more nefarious.
However, they are starting to say, wait a second, is that guy over there, did that guy just shoot somebody? Wait, stop, hold on. Maybe we should get the cops over here. Like, something's happening that's different.
It's taking him down.
I think it's going to hurt him, but it is fun to watch people like Glenn Beck try to spin backwards what they already did. And he has this little chalkboard where he connects things. And now you see him doing something he's never done before, where he puts a big X over something. So he says something like, oh, well, Trump would never be with a 15-year-old, so I'm crossing that out.
Right. I think Jon Stewart said, wait, you can't just X something out. That's not how it works.
It's like, how does he do that?
Yeah, it is interesting because I think those of us on the left, we waited for 10 years to see the Teflon maybe not work so well. So, whatever. All right, let's get to our winners and losers.
My winner, Governor Newsom, for projecting strength and a plan in response to the threat of Republican hyperpartisan gerrymandering. My loser, Bobby Kennedy, with this week's race to the bottom, with the elimination of $500 million for mRNA vaccine development that will impact future scientific research for RSV, HIV, cancer, flu virus vaccines.
My winner is Kathy Hochul, the accidental governor from New York, who has risen to the occasion. Unprecedented anti-constitutional moment we find ourselves in. In her words, this is a war, and that's why the gloves are off, unquote. My loser is actually an inanimate object this time, and it is the White House. Only the British did more harm when they burned it in 1812. From the destruction of the Rose Garden to the tacky gold medallions glued to every surface, it's been transformed by a mix of Bobby Trendy meets Saddam Hussein's tyrant chic.
My winner, columnist and political analyst Eugene Robinson, who on MSNBC's Morning Joe yesterday prodded a deer in the headlights-looking Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent into reluctantly admitting that tariffs are paid by American importers and, by extension, consumers, which directly contradicts his boss's nonstop lying that it is countries who pay the tariffs. And my loser, RFK Jr., who did cancel that $500 million in mRNA vaccine research funding. And that brings us to the weekly rant. Or should I say, that gets us to the weekly rant. So I'm old enough to remember what it truly meant to be a real man. Unfortunately, manhood today has been co-opted by a cabal of cosplayers who've turned masculinity into a toxic wasteland. Donald Trump burst onto the national political scene in 2015, and with him came a highly consequential redefining of what it means to be a, quote, real man. As a result, this past decade, too many American men have become unrecognizable. Under the tenets of Trumpism, real men are bullies. They bully much weaker men, women, children, the sick, disabled, immigrants, people of color, LGBTQ+. They bully people with little or no money or power, people who cannot defend themselves. Real men under Trumpism don't understand or even care that no means no. They just grab pussies and harass and assault women indiscriminately because they feel they can, because they feel entitled in some way, because they view women as property, inferior to their supreme male greatness, and not as other humans to be respected. Under Trumpism, real men don't need to be role models for children. Instead, they teach their kids to be immoral, unethical, corrupt. They wear t-shirts that say things like, fuck your feelings, because real men don't have feelings. And only a cuck cares about the feelings of others. No, real men don't give a flying fuck about anybody. Under Trumpism, a real man doesn't need to feel comfortable in his own skin. It's okay to showcase your insecurities, to constantly brag about yourself, to demand attention, affirmation, and credit for everything, to belittle others and insult the crap out of them, all in service of making yourself feel good. Because that's the only way Trumpian real men can feel good, by making others feel terrible. And under Trumpism, a real man doesn't need to help anyone. Bravery is out. Cowardice is in. So in that cowards like Senator Josh Hawley could pretend to be a tough guy, could actually write a book about masculinity, knowing that we all saw him desperately running for his life through the halls of Congress on January 6th, 2021. Yes, today's Trumpian real man is all performance. He just needs to be a good actor, to do and say all the things that Trump and his ilk have convinced him are the characteristics of a macho man. And if you actually play the Village People's classic disco song during these faux masculine performances, well, then that just proves you are a real macho man. All right, let's get to Leah Litman. She is a professor of law at the University of Michigan and a former Supreme Court clerk. In addition to co-hosting Strict Scrutiny, she writes frequently about the court for media outlets including the Washington Post, Slate, and The Atlantic, among others. and has appeared as a commentator on NPR and MSNBC, in addition to other venues. She has received the Ruth Bader Ginsburg Award for her, quote, scholarly excellence from the American Constitution Society and published in top law reviews. Her new book is LAWLESS, How the Supreme Court Runs on Conservative Grievance, Fringe Theories, and Bad Vibes. Leah, welcome back into the back room.
Thanks for having me. Always happy occasions.
Yeah. So, I was really searching for stuff to talk about because there's just never anything happening.
No legal news.
Actually, the opposite. That is true. Everything is happening. It comes at you so fast with such abundance. It's incredible. So let's start with what I think truly is the most important issue right now, and that's Epstein. Because it has such ramifications. It is the one thing in 10 years that is seemingly breaking through to MAGA and could, on some level, result in 3, 5, 10% of these folks breaking away from him, which could be a game changer politically. So what are you taking away from that right now, Friday as we tape? Because this stuff been changing every single day for literally the last month or so since this has been at the top of the news.
Yeah, so two things have stuck out to me in what is happening with the Epstein matter. One is it is in some ways a tried and true story of, are they making the cover-up somehow worse than the crime? Because their efforts to actually continue to conceal and to justify concealing the Epstein matters are so transparent, as are their efforts to find some way to indicate Donald Trump has no culpability whatsoever. And the second is just the galling nature of the politicization and the personalization of the Department of Justice as essentially a PR arm or army of lawyers who is doing Donald Trump's bidding and serving his personal interests rather than those of the victims or those of the countries. I'm happy to talk more, in detail about either of those things, but those are the two high-level themes that have struck me about what is happening.
Yeah, and if you can, go into some detail with that stuff.
Sure. So on the first, they are trotting out the idea that Ghislaine Maxwell, a criminally convicted sex offender, indicated she never saw Donald Trump do anything in her presence that was concerning. Let's just pause and note that this is a criminally convicted sex abuser saying that someone who has been found civilly guilty of sex abuse, right, didn't do anything concerning. This is someone who participated herself in the sexual abuse of girls, saying, well, I didn't find anything concerning. And you add to that she just lied throughout the criminal proceedings previously, and her statement just says in her presence. It is just an epic failure, evident to anyone who pauses to think about what is happening in their effort to somehow exculpate Donald Trump. And then the second aspect, the politicization and personalization of the Department of Justice, again, just smacks everyone in the face. They have allegedly not consulted any of the victims. The victims are making clear they do not want Ghislaine Maxwell to be transferred to lower security prisons or, goodness forbid, be pardoned or have her sentence commuted. The administration had to allegedly waive her status as a sex offender to move her to this Texas prison. What possible public interest is that serving? The idea that the number 2 official at the Department of Justice would be interviewing a witness, that never happens, but for the fact that he happens to be Donald Trump's former personal lawyer who represented him in the criminal matters in New York. So again, you can just see so transparently the ways in which DOJ is acting to protect Donald Trump rather than anyone else, much less enforce the law, and the ways in which their effort to cover up something about this is just so obvious.
It's not only obvious, it's kind of pathetic.
Yes.
Because they're literally twisting themselves into pretzels. They're spinning around like mice on a wheel. And none of it seems to be working because the story is not going away. They can't just say, all right, guys, enough, nothing to see here. We're done. And none of it's making any sense.
No.
You know, Donald Trump, yesterday, a reporter asked him about the move to the cushy minimum security camp. And he's like, I knew nothing about it. Like, really? You're the United States president? The one person in prison for these heinous sex crimes was moved to a minimum security camp, and you know nothing. You read about it? That was his answer. I read about it, just like everybody else.
Well,
really?
and the thing that she just so happened to offer in that interview, right, is that you did nothing wrong. And also, this is an administration that repeatedly trots out this theory of the unitary executive in order to justify a lot of the things they are doing. What is the unitary executive theory? It maintains that everybody in the executive branch is just simply exercising and implementing the president's wishes and wills. And you're telling me you had no idea what the number 2 official at DOJ, right, the criminal law enforcement arm of the federal government, was doing? Come on.
Well, under normal times, that in and of itself would be a huge scandal.
Yes.
That the United States president had no idea. He admitted, I have no idea that a convicted sex trafficker, you mentioned Todd Blanche as the number 2 in the DOJ. Ghislaine Maxwell was the number 2 in the worst sex trafficking cabal in American history. And you have no idea that she was just moved for what? And I ask MAGA, what did you guys get out of that deal?
Yeah.
Your heads are exploding because you want the truth. You want the Epstein files. And so far, we have nothing to see here, folks. And oh, by the way, we moved Maxwell down to a minimum security. Like, the head should be exploding 20 times more.
Yes, they should be. And I think you were right that their efforts to either offer distractions or half a loaf, right, rather than the Epstein files, are thus far utterly unsuccessful. You know, they attempted to blame the courts by saying, well, we sought the release of these grand jury transcripts. They don't want the grand jury transcripts. They want the Epstein files, and those files are within the government's possession. So their efforts to do some sort of sideshow thus far have not been working. And their explanations are so transparent and pathetic. You know, their base for once isn't buying them.
Yeah, well, because here's the problem. This is Trump's special sauce, when he tweets out Kofivi. Like, he knows how to distract people.
Yes.
He knows how to get the news cycle talking about what he wants to talk about. It's the old playbook. Let's go after Rosie O'Donnell again. Let's bring back Hillary Clinton. Let's go after Obama, which I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. All these things are classic Trumpian playbook techniques of deflection and distraction.
Yes.
Except Democrat hoax, all of it. Except here's the one problem. The nanosecond Pam Bondi on national television said, I have the files right here on my desk. The list, I have it all on my desk, and it's going to be released. The nanosecond that happened, nothing else matters to MAGA. Well, they remember that because it was on Fox. They remember that.
Well, not only do they remember that, but it was Donald Trump, right, who injected Jeffrey Epstein and this sex conspiracy into national politics. It has been Donald Trump who continue to bring up Jeffrey Epstein and his alleged association with different Democrats and made this a centerpiece of MAGA politics. So this has been reinforced and repeated and reaffirmed to his base for years, over and over. The idea that there is this vast conspiracy among political elites to insulate Jeffrey Epstein and other pedophiles and sex abusers from accountability. And so if that's what he's been telling them, I mean, now he is showing them there is indeed this conspiracy among political elites and the deep
and
state.
A deep state.
Right, exactly.
But it's us.
But
We're the deep state.
And so,
that's the surprise.
Right,
that's the big surprise. The big reveal. It is us. We are the
He
deep
found
state.
a way to make this true, right?
Yeah.
Unlike some of his other conspiracy theories and lies. So that's what you have.
Yeah, there was something else in that back and forth with a reporter that I thought was the most telling thing. And that was when he said something like Todd Blanche went down there and he's involved personally because he needs to be able to protect those involved who shouldn't be involved and hurt from this. And like, who are you talking about, dude? I mean, it sounds like you're talking about you or
Right.
other people that are in your inner circle.
Right. Again, that just seemed to underscore there's someone they care about who needs protecting. I wonder who that could be.
Yeah. Well, this gets to the other big problem of his and those around him is that MAGA, or at least some of them, are going, okay, just so I understand this, you're president right now. You control Congress. You're innocent, but somehow you're still not releasing those files that you promised us. Why? There's nothing to stop you. Why?
Right.
How does he answer that?
I mean, an explanation does not readily jump off the page. I mean, the other thing he has tried to do, in addition to setting up distractions, is to try to reframe the entire Epstein matter as another part of this hoax, right, that has been led by and generated by Democrats. The idea that it was Democrats, right, who made the Epstein files. But again, that just flies in the face of everything he has been telling his base for more than 10 years at this point, which is no, right? Like these files, right, are protecting Democrats. They weren't orchestrated by Democrats. And so that pivot is also not hitting, as they say.
But it also gets back to the Bundy thing. It's like, okay, if this is all a hoax, just crap made up by James Comey or whoever, she's standing there going, and I've got it right here on my desk.
Right.
And I'm going to release it. Like, why would they pay any attention to it if it was fake bullshit like he's claiming?
Right.
None of it makes any sense.
No.
So we got to hope that, given the way elections are won and lost on margins, got to hope that 3, 4, 5% of these people, 8%, whatever the number is, just scratch their head and go, no more of this shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and you're not going to lose support bullshit. You're losing support. You're losing my support. It just makes no sense. I don't know if that's going to happen. I mean, what do you think? I mean, we could sit here at two liberals at our righteous indignation party because that's what it is. It's fun and it's therapeutic. I got to admit, it is therapeutic, and we can do that all day. But the question is it going anywhere? Is it going to matter? Is it breaking through the way we hope and think it is?
I think it's just impossible to know. I mean, we are so far out still at this point from the 2026 midterms and the 2028 presidential election to know what slate of issues might, be top of mind then. I think the best we can do is try to continue, right, to keep this in the news and ensure it is getting covered and on people's minds and hope it breaks through. And beyond that, I am certainly not going to venture any predictions about whether
that's That's a really good point, and one that needs to be stressed, because I have conversations with a lot of folks. My good friend Cliff, you're out there listening, Cliff, this one's for you. Cliff is one of those people that's like, it's not going to matter. Just not going to matter. I don't believe it. And I think there are a lot of people, and he may be right, but I think there are a lot of people, just in the way society is today in general, with immediate gratification, like people want to think like, okay, if by August 30th, we don't have MAGA going, we're done, or we don't see congressmen or congresswomen going, you know what, I'm not supporting him anymore. Like, and your point is very well taken, and that is, I don't know if we're going to see that. That's just stuff that, brews under the surface. We don't know. I don't think we're going to know until maybe the polls that are coming out like right before the election.
Exactly. And I also just don't think it's predetermined.
No. And we have an obligation to, like you said, it has to be kept out there, not in a vindictive kind of petty way, but in a real smart way. Democrats have to really find the right messaging, because 16 months is a long time. And they have a habit of snatching victory from the jaws of defeat. And, it's just, I wish the election was tomorrow in a way, but I don't know. I think your point is very well taken. And the clips out there, I think, should take that to heart, that we're not going to see it that way. It's not a tangible public erosion other than the few people that we do see perhaps that are talking out and speaking out.
Yes, agreed.
And so I want to get back to something from before about the Todd Blanche thing going down to Florida. How unusual is it for someone in his position, A, and B, who should have gone?
So, how unusual is it? It's something that I have certainly never heard of or even heard being contemplated. I think that is also the consensus view among people who have been at the Department of Justice. As far as who should have gone, I mean, just the prosecutor in the case or a
And
local
who might that be?
prosecutor. Right, exactly. So this is a bit of the
Mhm.
rub. So it depends which case or cases we're talking about. If you want to talk about like a sweetheart deal that Jeffrey Epstein received, well, it turns out that that former prosecutor was an official in Trump 1.0's administration. If you
Mhm.
want to talk about, someone who secured a conviction in, Epstein matters, well, that happens to be Maureen Comey, who you just fired from the Department of
What?
Justice. So, yeah, the
That's
options
crazy.
aren't great there.
Hmm. And so it's like, if we summarize this, it's like, so Trump's a convicted felon himself, an adjudicated sexual abuser. He sends his former personal criminal attorney to interview Maxwell, who's herself a convicted sex trafficker and indicted perjurer, who's desperate to get a reduced sentence or a pardon. Well, lo and behold, she exonerates the big guy who controls her entire fate. And a few days later, she's transferred to a cushy minimum security facility, often called a camp. And what the hell's wrong with this picture?
It just reads or seems like something you would see in a movie or a book and would strike you as just totally implausible. Like nobody would do that.
Mm-hmm. What about this subpoena from the Oversight Committee? Everybody, I mean, they're really going back in time. AGs, former AGs like Bill Barr, Merrick Garland, Jeffrey Holder, Jeff Sessions, others, people like Robert Mueller, James Comey, the Clintons. What's the end game here? Is this just a massive, shameless political stunt? More cover for Trump, more distraction?
I think it's an effort to do a distraction, right? And to generate maybe the specter of hearings, right? At which the focus in the Epstein matters will not be on Donald Trump, but will be on other individuals. But again, I just don't think it's working. As to whether the spectacle of actual hearings might, I don't know. But going back to what we were talking about earlier, this isn't giving the base what they want. They want the files. And having someone like Robert Mueller come and testify is not remotely close to that. And also, the list of subpoenaed individuals omits some very potentially relevant individuals. Like, I don't know, the current head of DOJ who seems to control the Epstein files, or one of the former prosecutors, right, in the
Yeah, well,
Epstein case.
Alex Acosta, right, the person you mentioned
Exactly.
before.
Exactly. So it just doesn't seem to be doing the trick of distraction. And instead, in a lot of ways, just underscores they're still not really trying.
Yeah, well, they're trying to make this go away desperately, and it's just not working. Let's shift to the weaponization of the Department of Justice, because that is a huge problem. I mean, literally breaking the Department of Justice is issuing a subpoena to New York Attorney General Tish James. This is just so dangerous. Going after attorneys general. It's crazy.
Yeah. And, we have seen them target other Democratic politicians, from indicting individuals who attempted to engage in oversight, of the immigration and customs enforcement detention facilities. They are also trying to criminally indict a state court judge who allegedly, did not do what they would have liked her to do in a case involving an individual who is a non-citizen. And they are threatening criminal charges and investigations against a wide range of Democratic officials. And I think this is very much a part of that trend. And it doesn't seem like the subpoena is just about Tish James' efforts to enforce the law against people within the Trump universe, but is also related to some investigation or case her office has against the NRA, National,
Right.
Rifle Association. And I think that is equally concerning because it suggests, they are not just weaponizing the DOJ to pursue individuals, right, who are perceived as opponents of Donald Trump, right, and people in the administration, but also their political and ideological allies. I think this is an effort to kind of make a case or at least a spectacle in the press about the politicization of law enforcement and this idea of lawfare and the idea that, Democratic officials are always out to get Republicans and conservatives and groups associated with them. And that's how I understand, at least what I've seen about the, attempts to engage with Tish James.
And it's always either someone who is a perceived enemy of Trump or someone who, from his past, allegedly betrayed him or did something that he didn't like, or, as you mentioned, a right-wing organization like the NRA. Like, I think I would drop dead if I ever woke up and saw breaking news that the Department of Justice was going after a Republican attorney general because it did something bad about Greenpeace. Like, right? Like, it's just never going to happen. And like, you hope that at some point, a small percentage of the base understands that, like, puts two and two together. Like, wait a second, my taxpayer money is just going for vengeance and partisan nonsense. But so far, it hasn't. So let's talk about Obama. So you have the sitting U.S. president said that a former president is guilty of treason. And for those of you kids out there who don't know, treason is a crime punishable by death. Very serious charge. So Pam Bondi announced that the DOJ is opening a grand jury probe into the Obama administration. And this is over Russia. It seems every day is a Rubicon crossing with Trump, but it also feels like we have truly entered uncharted territory here. Have we?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I thought it was just last summer that the Supreme Court announced that former presidents are immune from criminal liability for actions related to their official duties. Donald Trump seems to have enjoyed the benefits of that decision, and he somehow doesn't think that it extends to Democratic presidents. Also, the idea that there was some sort of manipulation of law enforcement in the mere effort to understand what everybody within the intelligence community and federal government understood to be Russian interference with the election, the idea that looking into that is somehow a problem or disguises untoward motives is patently ridiculous. But yes, I think putting DOJ and training DOJ and the federal criminal law apparatus against a senior political official, the former head of the Democratic Party, is another alarming escalation in their politicization of DOJ and weaponization of law enforcement against political opponents and perceived political opponents.
Yeah, and to your point, this investigation, if I want to call it that, it's already been done. I mean, in 2020, there was a bipartisan
Marco
Senate
Rubio's committee.
Yes. There's no there. There's no crime, nothing. And now it's like Groundhog Day.
Because, and by a special counsel as well. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah. Let's talk about Boasberg. How unusual is such a complaint? Does it have any teeth?
The complaint is extremely unusual. The idea that the attorney general would just post on Twitter/X is also unusual about the filing of a complaint against a judge. And the complaint itself is just utterly baseless, and I think an obvious effort to intimidate other judges and also to fan the flames in their base, in their general attack on lower courts and the legitimacy of lower courts holding the administration accountable for their violations of the law. Just to quickly tick through what is so absurd about this complaint, they allege that Chief Judge Boasberg violated a judicial canon of ethics, which prohibits public comments revealing personal bias. The comments weren't public, first of all. They were in a closed-door meeting of the Judicial Conference. Second is the comments allegedly were not even about Chief Judge Boasberg's personal views. They were instead him relaying and just reporting the concerns of his colleagues about the Trump administration's potential and likelihood for violating lower court orders and teeing off a constitutional crisis, reporting those concerns to the Chief Justice. Also, those concerns proved to be well-founded. That's just a footnote. And we only know of these potential remarks and what they may or may not have said based on a memo posted at the Federalist, not exactly a credible news source, but that is the basis on which DOJ is basing its complaint. So it is an utterly frivolous document that is just designed to fan the flames with their base and to intimidate lower court judges.
What about Jack Smith and the Hatch Act?
I mean, again, this is just an effort to portray good faith law enforcement as a political endeavor, right? They are just equating his efforts to try to figure out what happened, right, and hold people accountable for their violations of the law as inherently problematic whenever the targets of these investigations or the people engaged in legal violations, right, are Trump and people in his circle.
What about the new census situation? He's ordered the Commerce Department to create a new census, excluding people who are in the country illegally. Can he do this? Is this legal?
No, it's not remotely
There's Supreme Court
legal.
Precedent, right?
Well, so the Supreme Court precedent on his previous attempt to add a citizenship question to the census was technically limited to the basis for the Department of Commerce's then reasons for adding the citizenship question to the census. But the Constitution and case law is perfectly clear that you have to count persons. You can't just pick and choose which people to count because you think it will advantage you politically.
Right.
So, yeah, law is pretty clear here, once again.
But he doesn't care about the law.
No.
Right? I mean,
but that's that's true, but that doesn't mean he can do it. He will get away with it, or he should. And I think underscoring the extent to which he is engaged in obvious brazen violations of the law is similar to what we were talking about earlier with Epstein. It is worth saying because building a consensus around the idea that he can't do this, right, is an important step and mechanism for enforcing the law, right, and encouraging and allowing lower court judges to do so, and potentially creating conditions under which even this Supreme Court would say he can't do that particular thing.
Mm-hmm. Texas redistricting. That's a whole shitstorm. Who knows how this is going to end? I guess the end is that Democrats eventually have to come back to Texas. The vote will take place, and the 5 new seats will be redistricted. That said, we've heard all this talk in the last 24 hours about the FBI getting involved. There's no legal space for them to do that, right?
No, I mean, the Texas lawmakers are not in violation of any federal law. And the FBI doesn't enforce, Greg Abbott or Ken Paxton's made up interpretations of state law. So there's no basis for the FBI to get involved. And if I can just point out that the nuclear arms race that we are seeing in Texas and with the Democratic officials having to respond is a byproduct of the United States Supreme Court saying federal courts cannot stop partisan gerrymandering. They chose war instead of peace by removing, the one institution, the courts, that are not themselves structured through partisan gerrymandering as an avenue for addressing partisan gerrymandering. And so when the Supreme Court said in 2019, yep, partisan gerrymandering may be constitutional, in any case, even if it's illegal, federal courts can't do anything to fix it, they were emboldening Republicans to try to engage in as extreme of partisan gerrymanders as they could without fear of accountability, to try to lock themselves into power for perpetuity that could not be fixed through elections.
And I know there's a lot of people out there who, when they hear stuff like this, they wonder, like, well, what does that mean? What happens if the FBI knocks on the hotel room door? What can these state legislators do in that moment? Do they have the right to say, I mean, get out of here. You have no jurisdiction here.
I mean, they
Yep.
can certainly refuse to answer questions. In the event that they are detained, they can challenge the basis for their detention in court. So there are, several things they could do, in the
So it's like
event this
immediate
actually
injunction motions,
materializes.
things like that.
Habeas petitions. Yep.
Right.
Challenging your custody.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, and what about the Democrats' threats to respond in kind? Are there
I think that's the
limitations that
only
present them?
that is the only way to respond. You cannot unilaterally disarm. You need to engage in similar partisan gerrymandering at the state level in order to basically equalize it at the national level, and then hopefully adopt a federal prohibition on partisan gerrymandering in the long term. As to whether there are limits on their ability to do so, I mean, when the Supreme Court said partisan gerrymandering can't be challenged in federal court, that should mean partisan gerrymandering can't be challenged in federal court, period.
But what about like the state constitutions?
Yes.
Like, are there limitations that would stop something like this from happening before the midterm election?
Right. So in some states, there might be state constitutional limitations on partisan gerrymandering. Whether there are depend on what the state constitution says, as well as what a state Supreme Court would say about what the state constitution means. So yes, there are potential state constitutional limits on partisan gerrymandering. Should note there are potential federal constitutional limitations on state courts' ability to use state constitutions to limit partisan gerrymandering because of this idea the Supreme Court has thrown around known as the independent state legislature theory, which is this frankly absurd notion that only state legislatures, to the exclusion of all other institutions, at least at the state level, can write the rules regarding federal elections. And under that theory, state courts are limited in their ability to enforce state constitutional limitations on state legislatures' power to write rules regarding federal elections. So yes, there are some possible state limits, again, depending on the state, on a state-by-state basis on partisan gerrymandering, but there are also federal limits on the state courts and state constitutions' ability to constrain partisan gerrymandering.
My head spins when I think about all this stuff because it is such an attack on democracy. It is a race to the bottom, unfortunately,
Yes.
and a justifiable one. And I hope it's a race that Democrats do win. My next question is about Emil Bove. You're a law school graduate. You're a law professor. You took an oath. You teach young people about the law. I would imagine you must have some very strong feelings about someone like him getting a lifetime appointment to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals.
I mean, I just think it is appalling, the idea that you would appoint someone to a lifetime position on the federal courts who was credibly and plausibly accused of encouraging the executive branch to say fuck you to the courts and defy judicial decisions, for whom there are multiple whistleblowers, right? And corroborating evidence as to these whistleblowers' accounts about his plans to defy the courts, and his participation in the Eric Adams situation and pressuring and goading federal prosecutors into dropping these charges, the federal charges of public corruption against Eric Adams, in exchange for Adams' consideration and cooperation in the Trump administration's federal immigration enforcement. I mean, he basically, forced out high-profile prosecutors at the federal level who were unwilling to engage in this blatant quid pro quo and abuse of federal criminal power and federal criminal enforcement in exchange for political favors. The idea that this is now someone ostensibly charged with the neutral, principled administration, interpretation, and enforcement of the law is appalling.
And he is most likely headed to the Supreme Court, is he not?
I mean, he's certainly going to be on the short list. When there is a vacancy on the Supreme Court, there's no doubt, no question in my mind that Donald Trump is really going to want to put him there because he has proved himself to be a complete loyalist hack.
Yeah, and that's the real danger in Bove. is when he gets to the Supreme Court. I want to ask you about the Supreme Court in a second, but I got one other question about Alina Habba and that mess in New Jersey. I mean, it's another area where my head spins. It's like, okay, the judges who have a right to appoint a new attorney for New Jersey fired her essentially and replaced her with somebody else. And she's like, I'm not going anywhere. Like, she's not going anywhere. Like, does she have a right to say I'm not going anywhere? What's going to happen here? Because I know this is happening in another state or two in the country.
Yeah. So the president has the authority to remove, someone who is appointed by courts and to select someone, to serve, instead. But there are limitations on that. He's not supposed to be able to appoint someone to that position whose nomination has been submitted to the Senate, as Alina Habba's was. Also, it's the president who can do this, not the attorney general. And given that it was the attorney general who made the announcement with unclear phrasing, that has contributed to the situation of uncertainty in New Jersey. So, as ever, it is their unwillingness to dot their I's and cross their T's that is contributing to chaos, in addition to their kind of corrupt motives.
It's just a mess every hour of every day. So my last question, Supreme Court, what's the latest coming out of the court? What should we be looking for? What are you concerned about most? What's coming up ahead?
So the big news is that Friday, August 1st in the evening, the Supreme Court released an order indicating they want the parties in one of their cases for next term to tee up for them whether what remains of the Voting Rights Act is actually unconstitutional. So the case concerns Section 2, which is a nationwide prohibition on racial discrimination in voting. It is effectively a guarantee that legislatures have to ensure that Black voters are represented and have political opportunities in districting. And the theory is, this prohibition on legislatures discriminating against Black voters is actually anti-white racial discrimination. And again, this would undo what remains of the Voting Rights Act. And we know what will be the effect of that. State legislatures will erase districts where Black voters have the opportunity to elect a candidate. This is going to empower them to eliminate even more Democratic-held districts, kind of even expanding the situation beyond what is happening in Texas. And we know this because back in 2022, the Supreme Court effectively suspended the operation of the Voting Rights Act in the midterms. And what did that allow states to do? To implement maps that violated the Voting Rights Act and ensure Republicans held seats through districts that made Black voters, Hispanic voters, voters of color, language minorities into minorities, political minorities in a bunch of districts, rather than allowing them the opportunity to elect candidates of their choice. So it will enable even more anti-democratic power grabs than what we're seeing in Texas right now.
It's going to be a tough road ahead for sure. Leah, thanks so much for coming on. Always great stuff, great insights, and look forward to the next chat.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.